Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I am back today with another story for you. So if you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now on to today's topic. Today's topic is another lost gold mine, or possibly a lost gold and silver mine, a couple of separate mines in the northern Arizona Grand Canyon area. So anyhow, we'll get into some details, but we need to give you a little bit of a backstory on this particular person first. So we are going to talk today about John D. Lee's lost gold mine in the Grand Canyon. John D. Lee is John Doyle Lee. He was born September 6th of 1812. He was born in Illinois Territory. And around 1836 or 1838, he joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, better known as the Mormon Church, in the very early days of the Mormon Church. So he was actually a friend of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, and he was also a friend of Brigham Young. So John D. Lee, he assisted Brigham Young in the westward movement of the Mormon pioneers from Illinois and Missouri to present-day Utah in the 1840s or so when they came west to start their communities out in the Utah Territory area. So by 1856, Lee had become a United States Indian agent in the southern Utah area, where he helped the Native Americans establish farms, and I believe the main group of Native Americans were the Paiutes in this area. And he did then eventually serve in the Utah Territorial Legislature. And so he was a fairly high-ranking official and a high-ranking person within the Mormon Church and in basically all of the circles. And he had quite a few wives. I think he had like 18 or 19 wives total. Obviously, back in these early days of the religion, they did believe in plural marriages, which, of course, they don't practice that anymore and haven't for many years. But in the early days of the religion, that was how things were, and he had many wives and many children. So we're going to talk about one specific event that John D. Lee was involved in, which then leads to the situations that happen down the road here. And this specific event that John D. Lee was known to be involved in was the September of 1857 Mountain Meadows Massacre. And this was in southern Utah. This incident involved an immigrant wagon train. This group was from Arkansas, and they were camped in this area known as Mountain Meadows, and they were heading for California. And I believe Mountain Meadows was said to be around 85 miles north or northeast of Cedar City, Utah. So they camped in this meadow area, and probably it was a good area for having, water and grass for their horses and stuff like that. But this wagon train, they were attacked by Native Americans, by these Paiutes, and also some Mormon militia members were mixed into this group that had attacked them. The wagon train was known as the Baker Fancher Party, and supposedly their party included some members that may have been involved in the Hans Hill Massacre in Missouri in 1838, where I believe 18 Mormons were killed. So it was believed that this event, that precursor event, Hans Hill, may have led to this massacre at Mountain Meadows. And this massacre at Mountain Meadows had killed 120 people in the Baker Fancher party. Pretty much, I believe, all the adults and teens and everything. Only 17 young children survived. So John D. Lee was one of the Mormons in the militia, and he was one of the leaders of the men. But he had originally told the Mormon president, Brigham Young, that the natives were solely responsible for the attack. So that was what was said early on. And of course the government didn't like what happened, because this was, a pretty massive massacre. And the government, though, being as this was way out west, they didn't start to look into it right away, because you got to think about what was happening in the late 1850s. The Civil War was about to break out, and there were a lot of things going on in the eastern part of the U.S. So the incident kind of took the back burner for a while. And finally, once the Civil War was over in the mid-1860s and the dust started to settle in the late 1860s or even around 1870, the Mormon Church moved John south to the Grand Canyon area, just south of the border with Utah. So he was moved to an area we know today as Lee's Ferry. And Lee's Ferry is named after John D. Lee. It was one of the only spots for hundreds of miles where the Colorado River was calm and there was access from both sides of the river. So it was possible to have a ferry here to bring wagons and horses and stuff across the river, as neither side of the river at this point had cliffs or wasn't in the canyon, so it was accessible through a lot of roads and trails and stuff like that. So it was an obvious spot to set up a ferry to help travelers and, their wagons and livestock cross the river here safely. And I don't know if the ferry had already kind of been established a bit before John came along, or if John was the main founder of it, but it still bears his name today. It's still called Lee's Ferry, where this location was. And John had established a ranch right there at that location. It's on the north side of the Colorado River, and the ranch he named the Lonely Dell Ranch. It was on the kind of the north side or west side of the river. I guess the river kind of comes down at a angle at that point. But anyhow, he operated the ferry business here from the early to mid 1870s, and he was basically originally here to escape the law that was now looking into the massacre incident that he was involved in, and the government was looking at if they needed to charge people for their participation in that particular event. And John at this point felt fairly secluded and fairly safe down in the Grand Canyon. He was away, a few hundred miles away from where this incident had occurred. And it was pretty likely that mainly it was the Mormon Church that knew where he was. So anyhow, the church knows he's there. He's hiding out down there in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. But due to the fact that he's hiding out down there, he could not just venture into town or back into civilization whenever he wanted. He really needed to keep a low profile. So he spent his time, in his downtime, exploring a lot of the canyons and side canyons near Lee's Ferry, either upriver or downriver. And it was said that most of the time his wife, Emma, ran the ferry business and John was out exploring in the canyons. I believe that he had two of his wives down in the canyon with him, and so I guess it's likely that maybe Emma ran the ferry while the other wife that was down there maybe tended to, some of the livestock and the kids and stuff like that. But it was said that John would be absent from Lee's Ferry and out exploring for many days at a time. And he didn't really talk about his mining ventures except for once or twice to his wife Emma and to his daughter, one of his daughters in Utah, whom he had wrote a letter about his mining ventures or about this particular matter. It seemed that John had 7 cans of placer gold buried somewhere in the canyon near his gold mine. And it's believed that John prospected above and below Lee's Ferry and likely went to the confluence of the Little Colorado River fairly often and maybe went well beyond that. It is believed that he made rich gold and silver strikes in the canyon. And we know this from multiple sources. From his attorney, Wells Spicer, who would later become Judge Spicer. But attorney Wells Spicer at the time had defended John in his first trial for the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which ended in a hung jury. And of course, he was told about the mines by John. And of course, John would go through another trial later after that, but this is how Spicer came to know of his finds down in the canyon. Parts of John Lee's diaries that have also survived through the years made reference to Spicer and the mines, and these diaries John wrote while he was still in jail awaiting a retrial. And while John was in jail, Emma was still at Lee's Ferry, his wife. She was still at Lee's Ferry. She was still running the operation and everything. And John was sitting in jail. This was after he was captured, and he was waiting for his retrial. But some of his documents or notations in his diary, I guess is a better way to put it. One of those notations in his diary said, Monday, January 3rd, 1876, Spicer had gone with them in search of my hidden treasures. So we don't know who them is, but that was one of the things that was said in his diary. A couple weeks later, it says, Monday, January 17th, 1876, Emma had let Spicer have 3 of the horses and saddles to prospect on, and that he had them 3 weeks at one time. Spicer had promised her an interest in whatever he found. So John Lee also wrote a letter to his daughter, Amora, in Panguitch, Utah. He said, I have received a letter from Emma and one from Judge Spicer asking my permission to allow him horses to prospect with and to tell him where those ledges are from which I brought my silver to Lonely Dell. I wrote back saying I did not want anything to do with it. So these writings were all in the months before his eventual execution, showing that there was definitely a mine or two, maybe multiple mines or locations, and that people were already starting to look for it before John Lee was even executed. His second trial led to that. And I believe it was within a few months, it might have been, can't remember exactly the date that he died, but I believe it was 1877. It might have been in like March. So anyhow, people in the last year or so of his life, they are looking for his particular gold mines and silver mines down in the Grand Canyon. Now, obviously, he disappeared for days, so, days at a time, so things could have been a fair distance from Lee's Ferry, and we don't know exactly how he got there all the time, if it was just purely on trails with horses or what the situation was. But anyhow, we'll get on to a couple more details. In the 1880s, a man named Brown showed up stating that he had knowledge of 7 buried cans of gold dust and gold nuggets near the confluence with the Little Colorado River. He believed that one of Lee's mines was near there. He thought the mine may be found in the view of or above Vulcan's throne. Now, I don't know if this was the same mine or another mine. Anyhow, he thought it was in a side canyon on the north side of the Colorado River, about 6 miles southeast of Mount Emma. Now, when you look up Mount Emma is way further west in the Grand Canyon. So I don't know if there was another mountain at that point that he called Mount Emma in relation to or named after his wife, and if we're talking about the same Mount Emma or not. But this gentleman named Brown had hired a guide named Sam Bass to help him locate these clues and find the various lost mines that John had, and they never found them. Later it was determined that Brown was actually Mormon leader Isaac Haight, H-A-I-G-H-T, who was a participant in the Mountain Meadows massacre with John Lee. So it is possible, if he saw Lee before he died, that maybe Lee gave him some clues to the location of one of the mines or of multiple locations. The brother of Sam Bass, William Wallace Bass, he had come to Arizona in 1883, and he had heard about John Lee's hidden mines from his brother. And the story goes that William was given a map by one of John Lee's wives that showed the location of the 7 buried cans of gold. But even with the map, he was not able to find them. After Lee's death, many of the cans of gold and silver were found, or many more cans of gold and silver were found in his collection of things at Lee's Ferry and at his ranch. So it seems obvious that he did find some very rich discoveries of gold and silver, as he had the evidence of it also at Lee's Ferry or at his ranch. And it was said that Emma soon sold the gold and silver specimens and nuggets, and she didn't get much for the silver, but the gold was said to sell for around $7,000, or she got around $7,000 total for everything that he had amassed and had at their home place. And she ran the ferry for a couple more years and then moved to Holbrook, Arizona, or near Holbrook, west of Holbrook, and she eventually remarried. And her new husband also looked for the gold mines, but never found them either. Another account of the mines comes from after John Lee's death. This one was from a boy or a young man named Robert B. Hildebrand, or Hildebrand, depending on the source. When Robert was age 15, he lived at Lee's Ferry, and he worked there. And on several occasions, John and Robert would head out from Lee's Ferry with some pack animals and head out into the canyons. And after a long distance from the ferry, they would set up camp, and John Lee would then take one of the pack animals, and he would leave the young man to tend to camp. A few days later, John would return to camp with his pack animal, and it would be loaded down with gold and silver ore and cans of gold nuggets. And Robert would be one that said he truly believed that John had a rich mine somewhere in the canyons, as he had seen the evidence too. But he just did not know the exact location because he was left behind to tend camp, and of course John would disappear for a few days at a time, and then he would reappear. So he never did try to look for the mines himself. And it was said that in 1905 there was a bad earthquake in northern Arizona, and that may have also changed the landscape. And apparently it erased quite a few trails that had been that had gone through the area for a long time. And also in more recent years after that, the National Park Service took over most of the Colorado River, and some of the side canyons and stuff are part of the Grand Canyon or Glen Canyon, or under other federal control. The government also took over all the mining claims that were in the canyon area, so it is likely that if it were found, it may not be able to be mined. It might be on government land. And so that is the legend of John D. Lee's lost gold mines and silver mines in the Grand Canyon. They very well still could be there, especially with the Grand Canyon being very inaccessible and most people probably only making their way through parts of the canyon on rafts. People don't explore too much of the Grand Canyon anymore. So that is the story. If you have any thoughts or comments, you can leave them in the comments section. Keep it nice and civil, and I guess we will chat with you again soon for another story.